that are here in our country illegally. And I'll remind you, the only reason we're in this situation is because the Biden administration allowed 20 million people to come into this country unvetted. Unvetted. My every day is spent thinking about the known terrorists that are in this country that I just haven't found yet. The suspected terrorists, the criminals, the murderers, the pedophiles that are out there on the streets that we need to find and get off the streets because Joe Biden opened up our borders and allowed that invasion to happen.
The following is a news analysis regarding recent statements made about border security and executive authority. The claim that 20 million unvetted individuals have entered the United States is a lie. The assertion that an invasion is occurring due to the deliberate opening of borders is a lie. These statements are designed to create a false narrative of lawlessness to justify the use of extreme military powers under the Insurrection Act. This analysis will examine the evidence, the legal implications of such claims, and the accountability of the individuals involved. The speaker in the source, Kristi Noem, makes a specific and bold claim regarding the scale of migration. Kristi Noem states that the current administration allowed 20 million people to come into the country unvetted. This claim is repeated with the word unvetted used twice for emphasis.
The Biden administration allowed 20 million people to come into this country unvetted. Unvetted.
The speaker defines the situation as an invasion that has happened because the border was opened. This rhetoric identifies the lie as a massive and unvetted influx of people that supposedly justifies extraordinary executive action. The speaker further defines this lie by claiming that every day is spent thinking about known terrorists and suspected terrorists that have not been found yet on the streets. This framing is intended to define the current state of the nation as one of imminent peril that requires a strong response.
My every day is spent thinking about the known terrorists that are in this country that I just haven't found yet. The suspected terrorists, the criminals, the murderers, the pedophiles that are out there on the streets.
The source provides no forensic evidence to support the number of 20 million people. The transcript records a statement about the utilization of highly trained and skilled officers for specific operations. The source indicates these officers are used for enforcement because many times the officers are going after murderers, professional gangs, and terrorists.
Your officers are dealing with more and more protesters. Do you think you need more de-escalation training that get into the scenarios we have seen?
The officers that we have out there are very highly trained and skilled, specific for the operations that they're doing. They're utilizing the most gifted individuals on these operations to go out and to do enforcement because many times if they're going after murderers, they're going after professionals and gangs and terrorists that are here in our country illegally. And I'll remind you, the only reason we're in this situation is because
However, the source does not provide any statistical data, official reports, or government figures to verify the specific number of 20 million unvetted individuals. The forensic evidence in the transcript shows a reliance on anecdotal claims about murderers and pedophiles being out on the streets. The source notes the speaker is thinking about known terrorists but provides no names, specific threat levels, or locations for these individuals. The evidence proves that the claims are based on subjective fear rather than verified data. The transcript shows the speaker uses the term invasion to describe the situation at the border. This term is not supported by the evidence of specific enforcement actions mentioned in the same transcript. The source mentions the Coast Guard is swearing in a new commandant today.
The White House today, are you going to be in the meeting because a lot of illegals are from Venezuela? Or are you going to talk with Delcy Rodriguez like Trump?
I think I have other commitments today. We are putting in the new commandant of the Coast Guard. He is having his swearing in ceremony, so I'll be doing that. And then I have some meetings with law enforcement. So I will not be in that meeting, but the president will keep me informed.
Thank you.
This indicates that standard institutional procedures and ceremonies are continuing despite the claims of an overwhelming and dysfunctional invasion. The source shows that information and intelligence are gathered from various individuals. These individuals include local law enforcement and agents involved in the operations. But the source does not show any specific piece of intelligence that confirms the 20 million figure. The source mentions that Joe Biden opened up the borders. This is a categorical claim that is not supported by the evidence of the ongoing and highly skilled enforcement operations described by the speaker. The analysis of power and control in the source centers on the potential use of the Insurrection Act. The reporter asks about the final straw for invoking the Insurrection Act. The response shifts the focus to the strength of taking action.
Did the president say what his final straw would be to invoke the Insurrection Act if he did?
No, this president uses all the information and intelligence that he can get.
The source claims that Donald Trump is strong at taking action. The power dynamic described is one where a single individual makes fully informed decisions using intelligence gathered outside of standard bureaucratic channels. This intelligence reportedly comes from calls to people like Pete and local law enforcement. The control mechanism here is the threat of military intervention through the Insurrection Act. The source describes the use of authority when returning to the White House. This suggests a control strategy that relies on personal loyalty and direct communication with specific agents. The source shows a focus on domestic enforcement as a justification for increased executive power. The mention of Venezuelan individuals and meetings with Rodriguez highlights a control narrative focused on specific foreign groups. The power analysis shows that the speaker is attempting to frame the use of the Insurrection Act as a necessary tool for a strong leader. This narrative seeks to centralize control by delegitimizing the current executive oversight of the border. By focusing on the strength of a single individual, the narrative bypasses the traditional checks and balances of the government. The mention of Pete as a source of information emphasizes a decentralized and personal power structure.
That's why he calls me, he calls Pete, he calls local law enforcement. He talks to those individuals and agents as well that are involved that he knows well.
The meeting with Rodriguez regarding Venezuela serves to link domestic control with foreign policy concerns. The strongest defense argument presented in the source is that the decisions made are fully informed and based on the best possible intelligence. The speaker argues that information is gathered from agents and law enforcement who are known well by the executive. This defense is dismantled by the lack of specific evidence for the claims of 20 million unvetted entries. If the intelligence were accurate and fully informed, the data would be available to support such a large and specific number. The source mentions that Joe Biden allowed the situation to happen. However, the source also admits that highly trained officers are currently doing enforcement and going after professional criminals. This admission contradicts the defense that the border is simply open and unvetted. The defense also relies on the idea of commitments to every single citizen. This is dismantled by the focus on invoking the Insurrection Act, which is a measure that bypasses normal legal protections for citizens. The dismantling of the defense shows that the rhetoric of a fully informed decision is a cover for the potential use of military power without a factual basis. The source mentions a commitment to every state, yet the focus remains on a centralized executive decision regarding military force. If the administration were truly following through on commitments to every citizen, the focus would be on the rule of law rather than the invocation of the Insurrection Act. The claim that the border situation is an invasion is dismantled by the ongoing institutional actions, like the Coast Guard ceremony. The Insurrection Act is a set of laws that allows the use of military force within the United States. Under the law, the Insurrection Act is intended for situations where state authorities cannot maintain order or when federal laws are being obstructed. The source describes the situation as an invasion involving 20 million people. In legal terms, an invasion usually refers to an armed foreign force. The claim that unvetted migration constitutes an invasion is a significant legal leap that is not supported by existing statutes. The Insurrection Act requires a specific set of conditions to be met before the military can be deployed domestically. The source suggests that Donald Trump would use all available intelligence to determine the final straw for invocation. Legal standards require that the use of military force be a last resort and based on a breakdown of civil order. The source mentions the Coast Guard ceremony, which reminds the public that the Coast Guard has specific legal authorities for maritime law enforcement. These authorities are distinct from the extraordinary powers of the Insurrection Act. The law governing the border involves Title VIII and other federal statutes. The speaker in the source conflates these standard laws with the powers of the Insurrection Act. This conflation is a misrepresentation of the legal framework of the United States. The legal education provided here shows that the rhetoric of the speaker is not aligned with the actual requirements for military intervention. The professional judgment on the responsibility and fitness of those making these claims is severe. The reliance on a specific and unverified number like 20 million demonstrates a lack of commitment to factual accuracy and professional standards. The source shows a preference for personal intelligence gathered from individuals like Pete rather than official institutional data. This indicates a fitness level that prioritizes personal loyalty over bureaucratic and scientific expertise. The source suggests that the responsibility for the perceived invasion lies solely with Joe Biden. This judgment ignores the complex legal and operational realities of border enforcement described elsewhere in the same transcript. The fitness of an individual to exercise the powers of the Insurrection Act depends on a sober and objective assessment of reality. The transcript reveals an assessment based on overwhelming feelings and anecdotal evidence of criminals and pedophiles. This is not the professional standard required for the highest office in the country. The focus on a final straw for military invocation suggests a reactive and potentially erratic approach to governance. The source provides a picture of a decision-making process that is siloed and dependent on a small circle of advisors. This lack of transparency and reliance on unverified claims is a mark of professional unfitness. The responsibility to the truth is the primary duty of any public official. The expert authority stack in the source includes several key groups and individuals. There is a mention of highly trained and skilled officers who are experts in enforcement operations. There is a mention of a meeting with Rodriguez regarding the situation with individuals from Venezuela. There is the mention of the new commandant of the Coast Guard, who is an expert in maritime security. These are the experts and institutions that handle law enforcement and border security on a daily basis. The source indicates that the Coast Guard is an active institution with a swearing-in ceremony taking place for a new leader. This shows that the institutional expert authority is functioning as intended. The source mentions local law enforcement and agents as sources of intelligence. These individuals are presented as the primary experts for the decision-making process regarding the Insurrection Act. However, the source also shows that the speaker is not participating in certain meetings, such as the one with Rodriguez, due to other commitments. This indicates a fragmentation of the expert authority stack within the described leadership structure. The reliance on agents who are known well suggests a move away from institutional experts toward a more personalized and less accountable form of authority. The expert authority of the Coast Guard is focused on maritime law, while the rhetoric of the speaker is focused on a broader and more vague concept of invasion. Institutional accountability is the focus of the questions asked by the reporter in the source. The reporter seeks to understand the limits of executive power and the procedural triggers for military action. The source shows a lack of clarity on these triggers. The accountability of the Department of Justice and the federal courts is not explicitly detailed in the source, but the mention of the White House today suggests the locus of responsibility for these decisions. The source claims that the commitments to citizens are being followed through in every state. Institutional accountability requires that these commitments be based on verifiable facts and legal transparency. The failure to provide evidence for the 20 million figure is a significant failure of institutional accountability. The source mentions that the president makes fully informed decisions. Institutional oversight is designed to ensure that such decisions are reviewed and validated by multiple agencies. The source, however, emphasizes a more direct and personal line of communication that bypasses these oversight mechanisms. The swearing in of the Coast Guard Commandant is a reminder of the formal procedures that govern military and law enforcement roles. These procedures exist to provide a check on the use of power and to ensure institutional accountability. The procedural consequences of the claims made in the source involve the potential for a formal invocation of the Insurrection Act. This would involve a specific legal declaration and the deployment of federal troops. The source indicates that the president will keep certain individuals informed of these developments. The procedural reality of the border involves the processing of individuals under federal law and Title VIII. The source claims this process is being bypassed or is failing completely. The consequence of framing the situation as an invasion is the potential normalization of military solutions for civil and administrative issues. The source mentions that a meeting is occurring at the White House regarding Venezuela. The procedural outcome of such meetings determines the foreign and domestic policy of the nation. The source notes that the speaker will be informed after the Coast Guard ceremony is completed. This confirms the procedural flow of information within the political and military structure. The ultimate procedural consequence of the lie regarding 20 million unvetted entries is the erosion of the factual basis for legal and military procedures. If the facts are replaced by rhetoric, the procedures of the law become tools for political ends. The source leaves the reporter's question about the final straw unanswered, which is a procedural failure in the transparency of the government to the public. The claim that 20 million people have entered the country unvetted is not supported by the evidence in the source. The transcript shows a reliance on fear-based rhetoric rather than statistical data. The focus on the Insurrection Act suggests a desire to use military power to address a situation that is currently being handled by highly trained enforcement officers and the Coast Guard. The intelligence used for these decisions is described as personal rather than institutional. The responsibility for the truth remains with the speakers who make these claims. The procedural consequences of these lies include the potential misuse of federal law and the erosion of public trust. The institutions of the government, including the Coast Guard and local law enforcement, continue to operate under established procedures. However, the rhetoric of an invasion and the threat of the Insurrection Act challenge these very procedures. The accountability of the executive branch depends on a commitment to the facts and the law. This analysis shows that the current claims do not meet that standard of accountability. The source provides a window into a decision-making process that values strength and personal intelligence over transparency and forensic evidence. The final procedural outcome remains uncertain as the reporter's questions about the legal threshold for military action are deflected. The public record shows a gap between the claims of an overwhelming invasion and the evidence of ongoing professional enforcement. This gap is where the accountability for the truth must be found.